Pay attention to this photograph captured by a passing neighbor on a summer afternoon. A man stands in his front yard, garden shears in hand, seemingly posing for a casual snapshot. But look closer at what's visible through that half-glass door behind him. See that figure inside the doorway? The way he's holding something or someone? Notice the red streaks on the white doorframe and concrete step. In 11 minutes, police will arrive at this house and discover a young woman fighting for her life. In the basement, they'll find 6 bodies. And the 2 men in this photograph? They'll be waiting for the officers with smiles on their faces, because this wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was an experiment. An experiment to see if anyone would actually care enough to stop a murder happening in broad daylight. You know that feeling when you're driving through your neighborhood and everything just feels safe? Familiar houses, neighbors you've waved to for years, kids playing in yards? For Thomas and Carol Henderson, that feeling was shattered forever on July 14, 2017. They'd been married for 32 years, lived in Willow Creek, Ohio for the past decade. Thomas worked as an accountant. Carol taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They were the kind of couple who knew everyone on their street, who brought cookies to new neighbors, who organized the annual block party every 4th of July. That Friday afternoon, they were coming home from the grocery store, their trunk loaded with supplies for their daughter Amanda's college graduation party scheduled for that evening. Amanda was getting her nursing degree from Kent State, and Carol had spent the whole morning preparing her famous lasagna, making sure everything would be perfect. Thomas slowed their Honda as they turned onto Birchwood Lane, partly because Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down was walking her poodle, and partly because something caught his eye at 2847 Birchwood Lane, the Whitmore house. He'd lived 2 blocks away from Gerald and Kyle Whitmore for 8 years. Gerald was a mechanic who ran his own shop downtown. Quiet guy, kept to himself mostly, but always friendly enough when you ran into him at the hardware store. His son Kyle had moved back home a few years ago after some kind of trouble with a girlfriend, or so the neighborhood gossip went. Kyle worked at his dad's shop, drove a beat-up pickup truck, sometimes mowed lawns on the weekends for extra cash. They were the kind of neighbors you didn't think much about. Not friendly, but not unfriendly. Just there. But on this particular Friday afternoon, something was very, very wrong at the Whitmore house. "Tom, slow down," Carol said, her voice suddenly sharp. Thomas had already started slowing. Kyle Whitmore was standing in the front yard near some garden tools, and he was staring directly at their car, not the normal neighborly acknowledgement, but an intense, fixed stare, and he was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. "What's he doing?" Thomas muttered, bringing the car almost to a stop. That's when Carol gasped and grabbed his arm so hard it would leave a bruise. "Tom, look at the door! Behind him! Look at the door!" Thomas shifted his gaze from Kyle to the house's front entrance, a half-glass, half-wooden door that stood partially open, and there, clearly visible through the glass portion, was Gerald Whitmore. He was standing in the doorway, and he was holding someone, a young woman. Her body was limp, head tilted back. Her long dark hair hung down, and she was covered in blood. The white doorframe was splattered with it. The concrete step had pools of it, bright red in the afternoon sun. Gerald's shirt was soaked in it. "Oh my God," Carol whispered. "Oh my God, Thomas, I think they just killed someone." Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to drive away, to get Carol to safety, to pretend they hadn't seen what they'd just seen. But Carol was already reaching for her phone. "Don't call yet," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "They're watching us. If we call now, they'll know we saw." Kyle was still staring at them, still smiling. He raised one hand in a casual wave, like nothing was wrong, like his father wasn't holding a dying woman 15 feet behind him. "Take a picture," Carol said suddenly. "We need evidence. They're just standing there. Take a picture." Thomas's hands were trembling so badly he could barely reach into the back seat where he'd left his camera. They'd brought it to take photos at Amanda's graduation party. Now he was using it to document a murder. He raised the camera, trying to keep it steady, trying to make it look casual, just a guy photographing the neighborhood on a nice summer day. Through the viewfinder, he could see it all clearly. Kyle in the yard with those garden shears, positioned perfectly like a sentry. Gerald in the doorway behind him, visible through the glass, holding that girl's body. The blood. So much blood. Click. Kyle's smile widened. He knew exactly what Thomas had just done, and he didn't care. "Drive," Carol said. "Drive now." Thomas pressed the accelerator, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. As soon as they rounded the corner and were out of sight of the Whitmore house, Carol was already dialing 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's a girl," Carol's voice broke. "We just saw a murder, or almost a murder, at 2847 Birchwood Lane. There's a young woman and she's covered in blood, and there are two men, and one of them is holding her and—" "Ma'am, slow down. You witnessed an assault?" "Yes! No, it's more than that. The son is standing outside like he's guarding the place, and the father is inside the door with her, and there's blood everywhere. You need to send someone right now. She might still be alive." The 911 dispatcher kept Carol on the line, asking questions, while police cars were already being dispatched. Thomas pulled into their driveway 3 blocks away, and they both sat there, hands shaking, staring at the camera that held the proof of what they'd witnessed. "What if we're wrong?" Thomas said quietly. "What if it's not what it looked like?" Carol turned to him, her face pale. "Tom, I saw that girl. I saw the blood. We're not wrong." At 2:47 p.m., officers David Martinez and Jennifer Cole arrived at 2847 Birchwood Lane, expecting a possible domestic disturbance based on the 911 call. What they found was so much worse. Kyle Whitmore was still standing in the front yard. He watched the patrol car pull up, watched the officers get out, and he just smiled at them. "Took you longer than I expected," he said calmly. "Sir, we received a call about a possible assault at this address," Officer Martinez said, his hand instinctively moving closer to his weapon. Something about the whole scene felt wrong. "She's inside," Kyle said, gesturing toward the house with his thumb. "Dad's with her. You'll want to hurry if you want to save her." Officer Cole was already moving toward the door, her radio out, calling for an ambulance and backup. When she pushed open that half-glass door, what she saw made her freeze for just a second, training overriding horror before she was moving again, calling out, "Officer needs assistance." Gerald Whitmore was sitting calmly on his living room couch, watching afternoon television. His hands and shirt were covered in blood, but he looked up at Officer Cole like she'd just interrupted his favorite show. And there, on the floor between the couch and the front door, was a young woman lying in a massive pool of blood. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that Officer Cole could see bone. But incredibly, impossibly, she was still breathing. Barely. "Ambulance is 2 minutes out," Officer Martinez said, dropping to his knees beside the victim, pressing his hands against her neck trying to slow the bleeding. "Stay with us. Stay with us." The girl's eyes fluttered open. She tried to speak, but only blood came out. "Don't talk, don't move, help is coming," Officer Martinez said, his voice breaking. Officer Cole turned to Gerald Whitmore, who was still just sitting there on the couch. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them and step outside." Gerald stood up slowly, almost leisurely, his hands raised. "Sure thing, officer. Though you might want to check the basement before you take us away. Don't want you to miss anything important." Officer Cole felt ice run through her veins. "What's in the basement?" Gerald's smile was the coldest thing she'd ever seen. "The others." The ambulance arrived at 2:58 p.m., and paramedics immediately began working on the victim. She'd lost an enormous amount of blood. They estimated nearly 40% of her total blood volume. The fact that she was still alive was nothing short of miraculous. "We need to move now," the lead paramedic said. She's minutes away from complete cardiovascular collapse. As they loaded her into the ambulance, one of the paramedics found a student ID card in her back pocket. Melissa Hartley, age 22, nursing student at Cleveland State University. Meanwhile, more police units had arrived. Detective Michael Russo had been called in from home, where he'd been grilling burgers in his backyard for his son's birthday party. When he got the initial call, possible homicide attempt, suspects in custody, victim critical but alive, he thought it was bad. When he arrived on scene and Officer Cole told him what Gerald had said about the basement, he knew it was about to get so much worse. "You're going to want to suit up," Officer Cole said quietly. "I went down there. Detective, it's bad." The basement of 2847 Birchwood Lane looked normal at first. Concrete floor, metal shelving units with paint cans and tools, a workbench where Gerald apparently did his carpentry projects. But Officer Cole led Detective Russo to the far wall, where a tall shelving unit stood. "Watch this," she said, and pushed on one side of the unit. It swung open on hidden hinges. Behind it was a room that shouldn't exist. The space was about 10 feet by 12 feet, with walls that had been covered in soundproofing material. And along one wall, covered with tarps, were 6 bodies in various states of decomposition. Detective Russo had been a cop for 19 years. He'd worked homicides for 12 of those years. He'd seen terrible things, but this made him step outside for a moment, just to breathe clean air that didn't smell like death. The forensic team worked through the night. The 6 victims had all been young women, all showing signs of torture before death. Some of the bodies were so decomposed that identification would take weeks. Others were recent enough that their faces were still recognizable. Upstairs, Gerald and Kyle Whitmore were separated for interrogation. Neither had asked for a lawyer. In fact, they both seemed eager to talk. Detective Russo sat across from Kyle Whitmore in interview room B. Kyle was 28 years old, sandy hair, average build. He could have been anyone. That's what was so disturbing. He looked completely normal. "Kyle, do you understand your rights as I've explained them to you?" "Sure do." "And you're willing to speak with me without an attorney present?" "Don't need one. I'm happy to talk." Detective Russo opened his folder, pulling out the photograph that Thomas Henderson had taken just hours earlier. "This was taken at 2:47 p.m. today by one of your neighbors. Can you explain what's happening in this image?" Kyle barely glanced at it. "That's me standing in the yard, and that's Dad inside with Melissa. We were waiting to see how long it would take someone to call the cops." "Waiting?" "Yeah, it was an experiment. Dad's idea mostly, but I was curious too." Detective Russo kept his face neutral, though inside he was reeling. "An experiment to test what exactly?" Kyle leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "To test if people actually care. We've been killing girls for 6 months and nobody noticed. They just disappeared and life went on. So Dad said, what if we did it in broad daylight, right at the front door where anyone could see? Would people actually stop us, or would they just drive by and pretend they didn't see anything? You deliberately positioned yourselves so neighbors could see you killing Melissa Hartley?" "Yep. I stood outside with the garden tools, just being casual and normal. Dad did the actual cutting inside, right in the doorway. We left the door open. Made sure there was plenty of blood visible. I even waved at a couple cars that drove by before the Hendersons." Detective Russo felt sick. "Other cars drove by?" "Sure, 2 before the Hendersons showed up. One lady in a minivan, one guy in a truck. They both saw. The guy in the truck even waved back at me." Kyle smiled. "They saw exactly what the Hendersons saw, but they kept driving. Dad says most people's brains can't process things that don't fit their worldview. Guy standing in his yard on a sunny day? Normal. What's happening behind him? Doesn't compute, so they ignore it. But the Hendersons didn't ignore it. No, they didn't. I saw the camera. I knew what they were doing. I thought about stopping them maybe, but Dad said no. Let's see what happens. Let's see if they actually call the cops, or if that picture just ends up in a drawer somewhere." In interview room A, Detective Sarah Chen was getting a similar, but even more disturbing statement from Gerald Whitmore. I've been planning this for over a year, Gerald said, as casually as if he were discussing a vacation. The 6-month spree was all mapped out. I picked the girls carefully. College students, brunettes, from out of town mostly, living alone, no strong family connections. The kind of girls who could disappear and nobody would really push hard to find them. And your son? How did Kyle become involved? Gerald's expression shifted slightly, something almost like pride crossing his face. I've been preparing Kyle since he was 16. His mother died when he was 15. Car accident. Though it wasn't really an accident, if you know what I mean. After that, it was just him and me. I taught him what the world really is. That most people are sheep. That we're the wolves. That taking a life isn't wrong if you're strong enough to do it. Detective Chen forced herself to keep taking notes. Tell me about today, about Melissa Hartley. Melissa was always supposed to be different. The other 6, those were private. Fun, but private. With Melissa, I wanted to prove something. I wrote about it in my journal. You'll find it in my workshop, middle drawer of the workbench. I wrote about how we could probably kill someone in broad daylight and nobody would stop us, because people don't want to get involved. They don't want the hassle. They'll convince themselves they didn't really see what they saw. So you killed Melissa Hartley to prove a point about society? I didn't kill her. Gerald smiled. Not quite. According to what the officer said, she's still alive, which actually makes the experiment even better, doesn't it? We did this in broad daylight, Kyle standing sentry in the yard, me slashing her throat right there in the doorway, blood everywhere, and we're sitting here talking about it. We didn't run. We didn't hide. We waited for you to come. At Mercy General Hospital, Melissa Hartley was in surgery. The trauma team had been working on her for 3 hours, and Chief Surgeon Dr. Patricia Morrison had seen a lot of neck trauma in her career, but never anything this severe where the victim survived long enough to reach the hospital. I need another 4 units of O negative, Dr. Morrison called out, and get vascular up here. I've got arterial damage that's beyond what I can handle alone. In the waiting room, Melissa's parents had just arrived from their home in Columbus, driving 90 miles in under an hour after getting the call from police. Robert and Linda Hartley sat holding hands, both in shock, waiting for any news about their daughter. Detective Russo came to update them personally. Your daughter is still in surgery. The doctors are doing everything they can. Who did this? Robert Hartley's voice was barely above a whisper. Why would anyone do this to Melissa? We have 2 suspects in custody, a father and son named Gerald and Kyle Whitmore. We believe they're responsible for multiple homicides, and your daughter's case led us to discover the others. Linda Hartley's hand flew to her mouth. Multiple? How many? 6 victims recovered so far, plus your daughter. Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Hartley, I need to prepare you for the possibility that even if Melissa survives, she suffered severe trauma. The road to recovery will be long. But Detective Russo had no idea just how strong Melissa Hartley was. 6.5 hours after she'd been wheeled into surgery, Dr. Morrison emerged, exhausted but cautiously optimistic. She made it through surgery, Dr. Morrison told the Hartleys. We've repaired the arterial damage, closed the wound, and stabilized her. The next 48 hours are critical, but if she can get through that, she has a real chance. Melissa did more than get through the next 48 hours. She fought. And 4 days after the attack, when she opened her eyes and saw her parents beside her hospital bed, the first thing she tried to do was speak. Don't talk yet, her mother said, tears streaming down her face. Your throat needs to heal. Just rest. But Melissa shook her head. She pointed to a notepad on the side table, and her father handed it to her with a pen. With shaking hands, she wrote, Did they catch them? Yes, her father said. The men who hurt you are in custody. You're safe now. Melissa wrote again. How many others? The question made both her parents freeze. How did she know there were others? 6, her father said quietly. They found 6 other women in the house. Melissa closed her eyes, tears running down her cheeks. Then she wrote, I heard them talking. They said I was number 7. They said the others didn't fight hard enough. Meanwhile, the investigation into the Whitmore house was revealing the scope of their crimes. The 6 bodies from the basement had been carefully documented and removed. Forensic anthropologists and pathologists were working to identify them and determine causes of death. Within a week, all 6 victims had been identified. Rebecca Torres, 21, nursing student from Cleveland State, missing since January 19, 2017. Last seen leaving the campus library at 9 p.m. Amy Cho, 23, graduate student in psychology from Case Western, missing since February 8, 2017. Last seen at a bus stop near her apartment. Lindsay Patterson, 19, freshman at John Carroll University, missing since March 15, 2017. Last seen jogging on the towpath trail. Brooke Sullivan, 24, recent graduate working as a teacher's aide, missing since April 22, 2017. Last seen leaving a grocery store parking lot. Vanessa Ramirez, 20, sophomore at Cleveland State studying education, missing since May 30, 2017. Last seen walking to her car after an evening class. Kayla Morrison, 22, senior at Baldwin Wallace University, missing since June 18, 2017. Last seen at a coffee shop near campus. Each disappearance had been reported to police. Each family had been desperate for answers. But the cases had gone cold quickly. No bodies, no witnesses, no clear evidence of foul play, just young women who vanished. Detective Russo interviewed each family, and the conversations were heartbreaking. "We kept calling the police," Vanessa Ramirez's mother said through tears. "Every day for 2 months we called, asking if there was any progress. They said they were doing everything they could, but there were no leads. And all that time our baby was already gone. She was already dead in that monster's basement." The forensic evidence from the house painted a horrifying picture. The secret room in the basement had been meticulously constructed. Soundproofed walls, locks on the inside of the hidden door, restraints mounted to the walls. Gerald had built it himself over several months, purchasing materials from different hardware stores to avoid suspicion. His workshop yielded even more evidence. The journal that Gerald had mentioned was exactly where he said it would be. Detective Russo read through it with growing horror. Gerald had documented everything: his philosophy about human nature, his methods for selecting and abducting victims, his techniques for torture, and his plans for the daylight experiment with Melissa. One entry from May 30, 2017, the day Vanessa Ramirez disappeared, read, "Took VR today. She was easy. Offered to help with her groceries when she dropped a bag in the parking lot. Kyle drove the van around while I walked her to what she thought was her car. Simple. Nobody pays attention. 3 other people saw us walking together. Nobody thought anything of it. Why would they? She's smiling, I'm smiling. We're just 2 people in a parking lot. Tomorrow we start on her." Another entry from June 18, 2017. "KM is our 6th. Kyle is getting better at this, more creative, more patient. But I'm getting bored with the basement. It's too easy, too private. I want to know if we could do this in public, if we could kill someone where people could see us. Would anyone actually stop us? Or would they just look away, pretend they didn't see, go home and forget about it? I think they'd forget. I think people are so trained to not get involved that we could do anything and they'd just walk past. Let's find out." The final entry was dated July 13th, 2017. "Tomorrow we do it. Kyle will stand outside playing the role of normal guy in his yard. I'll do the cutting right in the doorway. We'll leave everything visible. Blood, body, all of it. Let's see how long it takes for someone to call the cops. I'm betting at least 5 people will drive by before anyone does anything. Kyle thinks 3. We'll see who's right." As Detective Russo read through the journal, he realized that Gerald and Kyle Whitmore weren't just killers. They were conducting what they saw as social experiments, testing the limits of human apathy and indifference. The investigation also uncovered disturbing information about Kyle's mother. Emily Whitmore had died in a single car accident in 2005 when Kyle was 15. At the time, it had been ruled an accident. She'd apparently lost control of her car on a rainy night and crashed into a tree. But during interrogation, Gerald had hinted that it wasn't really an accident. Detectives reopened the case and found some troubling details that had been overlooked at the time. The brake lines on Emily's car had been damaged, but the damage was attributed to the crash. Now, knowing what they knew about Gerald, they had the car re-examined. A forensic mechanic found evidence that the brake lines had been deliberately cut, then partially repaired to hide the sabotage. "Emily was going to leave me," Gerald said during one interrogation session. "She was going to take Kyle and move to her sister's place in Pennsylvania. I couldn't let that happen. I needed Kyle. So I fixed it so she couldn't leave. Made it look like an accident. And after she was gone, I had Kyle all to myself. I could mold him properly without her interference." Dr. Sarah Brennan, a forensic psychologist, was brought in to evaluate both suspects. Her assessment was chilling. "Gerald Whitmore is a textbook psychopath," she told the prosecution team. "He has no empathy, no remorse, and a grandiose sense of his own intelligence and superiority. He views other people as objects to be manipulated or destroyed. He's been this way his entire life." "And Kyle?" Prosecutor James Morrison asked. "Kyle is more complicated. He wasn't born a psychopath. He was created by his father. Gerald started grooming him at age 15, right after killing his mother. Over 12 years, Gerald systematically destroyed Kyle's ability to empathize, to form normal moral judgments. He essentially programmed Kyle to be his partner in murder. That doesn't excuse Kyle's actions, but it explains them." As the investigation continued, more disturbing details emerged. Detectives found that at least 3 neighbors had noticed strange things at the Whitmore house over the past several months, but hadn't reported them. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived directly next door, told police she'd heard weird sounds late at night in March, like someone crying or screaming but muffled. She'd mentioned it to her husband, who said it was probably just their TV turned up too loud. Mr. Patterson, who lived across the street, said he'd seen young women entering the Whitmore house on several occasions, but never saw them leave. "I just figured they were girlfriends or something," he said. "It wasn't my business." Most disturbingly, 2 drivers had passed by the Whitmore house during the attack on Melissa Hartley and had seen the same thing the Hendersons saw, but they kept driving. One of them, 35-year-old Mark Stevens, came forward after seeing the news coverage. "I saw the guy standing in the yard and something red through the door," he admitted to police. "But I convinced myself it was paint or something. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to be wrong and look stupid." He broke down crying. "If I had stopped, if I had called, but I just kept driving." The other driver, who refused to be identified, told a similar story through their attorney. They'd seen Kyle in the yard and glimpsed something concerning through the door, but they'd rationalized it away and kept driving. "This is exactly what Gerald was counting on," Detective Russo said during a press conference. He believed, correctly in some cases, that people would see a crime in progress and choose not to get involved. That they'd rationalize what they saw, convince themselves it wasn't their business, and drive away. The Hendersons broke that pattern. They saw evil happening and they chose to document it and report it immediately. They saved Melissa Hartley's life. Thomas and Carol Henderson had become reluctant heroes. They'd given their statement to police, turned over the photograph, and tried to return to normal life. But they were haunted by what they'd witnessed. "I keep thinking about those other 2 drivers," Carol said in an interview with a local news station. "They saw the same thing we saw and they just drove away. How do you live with that? How do you know you could have saved someone and chose not to?" The photograph itself became crucial evidence. Forensic analysts examined it in detail, confirming the timestamp, the blood spatter patterns visible on the door frame, and the positioning of both suspects. The image corroborated everything Melissa would later testify about the attack, and Melissa was getting stronger every day. 2 weeks after the attack, she was able to speak in brief sentences. A month after, she was well enough to give a detailed statement to police. Sitting in a private room at the police station with a victim advocate by her side and her parents in the room, Melissa told her story. "They took me on July 11th, Melissa said, her voice hoarse from the damage to her throat. "I was walking to my car after my shift at the hospital. I'm a nursing student and I was doing clinical rotations at Metro Health. I was tired. It was late." She paused, took a sip of water. "A van pulled up next to me. 2 men got out. The younger one grabbed me from behind and put something over my face, a cloth with something on it that made me dizzy. I tried to fight, but I couldn't move right. The older one helped him put me in the van. I remember seeing the parking lot, seeing people, thinking someone would help, but it happened so fast. When I woke up, I was in a basement, a room with soundproof walls. I was chained to the wall." Her voice broke and her mother squeezed her hand. "They kept me there for 3 days. Gerald would come down and talk to me. He said I was number 7. He said the other 6 didn't fight hard enough, didn't make it interesting enough. He said Kyle was learning from him how to do it right." Detective Russo kept his voice gentle. "Melissa, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me about July 14th, about what happened upstairs." Melissa nodded, tears running down her face. "On the 3rd day, Gerald came downstairs and he had this look in his eyes, excited, almost manic. He said, 'Kyle and I have a new game. We're taking you upstairs.' I thought they were going to let me go. I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid," her mother said firmly. "None of this is your fault," Melissa continued. "They dragged me up the stairs. I tried to fight, tried to scream, but I was so weak. Kyle took me to the front door and Gerald went outside first. Then Kyle came back and they switched places. Kyle went outside and Gerald pulled me into the doorway. Gerald kept saying things like, 'Let's see if anyone actually cares, and I bet they all just drive by.' I didn't understand what he meant at first. Then I saw Kyle standing in the yard, just casual, like he was enjoying the weather. And I realized they were doing this where people could see. They wanted people to see. Gerald had a knife. He showed it to me and said, 'This is going to hurt, and you're going to die, and people are going to watch it happen and do nothing.' I tried to fight him. I tried so hard." She held up her hands, which still bore defensive wounds. "He cut my throat and I fell. The pain was... I can't even describe it. I couldn't breathe right. Blood was everywhere. I could see Kyle through the door standing in the yard. I saw a car slow down and Kyle waved at it. Then the car drove away. Another car passed and the same thing happened. I thought I was going to die right there while people just drove past. Then I saw another car slow down. It was a Honda. I could see the man driving and the woman in the passenger seat. She looked right at me, and I saw her face change. She saw me. She saw what was happening, and I thought, please, please call for help. The man, I found out later it was Mr. Henderson. He had a camera. I saw him raise it and take a picture. Kyle saw it too. I saw him smile at them. And I thought, what if they don't call? What if they just drive away like the others? But they didn't. I don't know how long it was. It felt like forever, but it was probably just minutes. And then I heard sirens. Police came. The officer, Officer Martinez, he tried to stop the bleeding. He kept telling me to stay with him. I remember trying to talk, trying to tell him there were others in the basement, but I couldn't make words come out. What happened next? Detective Russo asked. I remember the ambulance. I remember surgery. I remember waking up and seeing my parents and knowing I survived, that I was the one who got to live. Melissa's testimony was devastating, but it was exactly what the prosecution needed. Combined with the physical evidence, the journal entries, and the confessions from both suspects, the case against Gerald and Kyle Whitmore was ironclad. The trial began on January 15, 2018, 6 months after the murders. The prosecution, led by James Morrison, laid out the case methodically. The abductions, the torture, the murders, the calculated nature of the daylight attack on Melissa. The defense, and Gerald and Kyle had separate attorneys despite the conflicts between their defenses, tried to argue that the confessions had been coerced, that the journal entries were fiction, that the photograph was misleading, but the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic pathologists testified about the causes of death for each victim. DNA evidence placed both Gerald and Kyle at the scenes. The journal entries matched perfectly with the timeline of the murders. And then there was Melissa's testimony. When Melissa took the stand, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, victims' families, curious onlookers who'd been following the case. Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who survived. She wore a high-necked blouse that covered most of the scar on her throat, but the bottom portion was still visible, a thick, angry line that would never fully fade. For 2 days, Melissa testified about her ordeal. She described her abduction, her time in the basement, the attack, and the agonizing wait to see if the Hendersons would call for help. "I think about those other 2 cars sometimes," Melissa said. "The ones that drove by and did nothing. I wonder if they know they saw someone dying and chose not to help. I wonder how they live with that." Defense attorney Marcus Webb, representing Kyle, tried to paint Kyle as a victim of his father's manipulation. "Your Honor, my client was systematically abused and brainwashed from age 15. He's as much a victim here as anyone." But Prosecutor Morrison wasn't having it. Kyle Whitmore was an adult. He was 28 years old. He had countless opportunities to walk away, to get help, to report his father. Instead, he actively participated in the abduction, torture, and murder of 7 young women. He stood guard while his father tried to kill Melissa Hartley in broad daylight. He smiled and waved at passing cars while a woman bled to death behind him. That's not a victim. That's a monster. Gerald's defense was even weaker. His attorney, Rebecca Stone, could barely mount any defense at all given Gerald's confessions and the journal. She tried to argue temporary insanity, but Dr. Brennan's psychiatric evaluation destroyed that argument. "Gerald Whitmore is not insane," Dr. Brennan testified. "He knows exactly what he did. He planned it meticulously. He understood that it was illegal and that society considers it wrong. He simply doesn't care. That's not insanity. That's psychopathy." The trial lasted 7 weeks. The jury, 9 women and 3 men, deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, there was no dramatic outburst. Gerald just smiled that same cold smile he'd had in the photograph. Kyle stared straight ahead, expression blank. Sentencing came 3 weeks later on April 18, 2018. Before the judge imposed sentence, he allowed victim impact statements. Robert and Linda Hartley spoke about their daughter's suffering and her incredible strength. Rebecca Torres's mother spoke about the daughter she'd never see again. Amy Cho's father talked about how his family had been destroyed by grief. One by one, the families of the victims spoke. Then Melissa herself stood to speak. "I'm the lucky one," she said, her hand touching the scar on her neck. "I'm the one who gets to stand here and speak. 6 other women don't have that chance. They were murdered by these men, tortured and killed for entertainment, for some sick experiment about human nature." She turned to look at Gerald and Kyle. "You thought people wouldn't care. You thought you could murder someone in broad daylight and everyone would just look away. You were almost right. 2 cars drove by and did nothing, but the Hendersons didn't look away. They saw evil and they chose to do something about it. They proved you wrong. I'm alive because 2 people chose to care, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life honoring that choice. I'm going to become a nurse. I'm going to help people, and I'm going to make sure nobody ever forgets what happened on Birchwood Lane." Judge Patricia Moreno, a 20-year veteran of the bench, addressed the defendants. "Gerald Whitmore, Kyle Whitmore, you are both guilty of crimes so heinous that they shock the conscience. You killed 6 women and attempted to kill a 7th. You treated human life as worthless. You conducted experiments in cruelty and indifference. You showed no remorse, no empathy, no hint of humanity." She looked at Gerald. "Mr. Whitmore, you corrupted your own son, murdered your wife, and destroyed countless lives in your quest to prove some twisted philosophy about human nature. The only thing you proved is that evil exists, and that it must be stopped." Then to Kyle. "Mr. Whitmore, you had choices. You chose to become a killer. You stood in that yard and smiled while your father murdered Melissa Hartley. You may have been influenced by your father, but you were an adult who made conscious decisions. Therefore, I sentence each of you to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 180 years for the additional charges. You will both die in prison, and society will be safer for it." As they were led from the courtroom, Gerald turned and looked at the Hendersons, who were sitting in the gallery. He smiled at them one last time, and Thomas felt Carol's hand grip his tightly. The impact of the Birchwood Killers case rippled far beyond Willow Creek, Ohio. Thomas and Carol Henderson were publicly thanked by Judge Moreno during sentencing. "You saved a life that day," the judge told them. "You saw evil unfolding and you chose to document it and report it. Melissa Hartley is alive because of your courage." But the Hendersons struggled with what they'd witnessed. Carol developed PTSD and had nightmares for months. Thomas couldn't drive down Birchwood Lane without having panic attacks. They eventually sold their house and moved to a different suburb, wanting a fresh start. "People call us heroes," Carol said in an interview 6 months after the trial. "But we just did what anyone should do. We saw someone in trouble and we got help. That should be normal, not heroic." The case sparked a national conversation about community responsibility and the bystander effect. How many crimes go unreported because people convince themselves it's not their business? How many victims suffer because witnesses choose not to get involved? Willow Creek implemented a community watch program and held town halls about recognizing and reporting suspicious activity. "We missed the warning signs," Police Chief David Williams admitted. "Multiple neighbors noticed strange things but didn't report them. We need to create a culture where people feel empowered to report concerns without fear of being wrong or looking foolish." Melissa Hartley became a powerful voice for victims' rights and community vigilance. Despite 8 months of physical rehabilitation and ongoing therapy for PTSD, she finished her nursing degree in May 2019. She now works at Mercy General Hospital, the same hospital that saved her life, and speaks regularly at schools and community centers. "People ask me how I can work as a nurse after what happened to me," Melissa said during a TEDx talk in 2020. "But that's exactly why I became a nurse. I know what it's like to be helpless, to need someone to save you. Officer Martinez and those paramedics saved me. Now I get to help save other people." In 2019, Melissa worked with state legislators to pass Melissa's Law in Ohio. The law mandates faster response times for missing persons reports involving young adults, provides legal protection for citizens who report suspected crimes in good faith, and requires law enforcement to take all missing persons cases seriously from the start. If police had connected the dots between these missing women earlier, some of them might still be alive, Melissa said at the bill signing ceremony. "We can't change the past, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again." The families of the 6 murdered women, Rebecca Torres, Amy Cho, Lindsay Patterson, Brooke Sullivan, Vanessa Ramirez, and Kayla Morrison, formed a support group and advocacy organization called the Birchwood 6 Foundation. They work to support families of missing persons and to keep cold cases in the public eye. "Our daughters won't be forgotten," said Maria Torres, Rebecca's mother. "They're not just statistics. They were real people with dreams and futures. And we're going to make sure their stories help protect other young women." The photograph that Thomas Henderson took, the one showing Kyle in the yard and Gerald in the doorway with Melissa, was sealed as evidence, but its existence became public knowledge. It was never released to the media out of respect for Melissa and the victims' families, but it served as a powerful symbol of what happens when people choose to look rather than look away. Gerald and Kyle Whitmore are both incarcerated at the Ohio State Penitentiary in Youngstown. They're kept in separate units. Gerald has filed multiple appeals, all denied. He gives occasional interviews to journalists and researchers, still trying to justify his philosophy about human nature. He shows no remorse. Kyle has been quieter. In a 2021 interview, he said simply, "I was wrong about everything my father taught me, but knowing that doesn't change what I did. I have to live with that every day. Neither will ever see freedom again." The two drivers who passed by the Whitmore house during the attack on Melissa and did nothing have never been publicly identified, but their inaction continues to haunt the case. One of them, Mark Stevens, has spoken anonymously about his guilt and has become involved in community safety programs, trying in some small way to make amends. The other has never come forward beyond the initial anonymous statement through their attorney. "I think about them sometimes," Melissa said in a 2022 interview. "I don't hate them. I just hope they've learned from it. I hope they'd make a different choice now." For Thomas and Carol Henderson, life has slowly returned to a new normal. Their daughter Amanda, whose graduation party was postponed because of the events of July 14th, is now a nurse working alongside Melissa at Mercy General. The two women have become close friends. "Mom and Dad saved Melissa's life," Amanda said. "And now Melissa and I save other people's lives together. There's something beautiful in that." The Hendersons have also become advocates for bystander intervention training. In 2020, they partnered with a national organization to develop educational programs for schools and communities about recognizing and reporting crimes in progress. "We want people to understand that it's okay to be wrong," Thomas explained during a workshop in 2021. "If you see something suspicious and you report it and it turns out to be nothing, that's fine. Nobody's going to punish you for caring. But if you see something and do nothing, and someone gets hurt because of your inaction, you have to live with that forever. And trust me, that's a much heavier burden than the temporary embarrassment of being wrong." The case has been studied extensively by criminologists and psychologists interested in serial killers, familial crime partnerships, and the psychology of bystander intervention. Dr. Sarah Brennan published a comprehensive case study in 2019 titled "The Birchwood Killers: A Study in Inherited Psychopathy and Social Apathy." "What makes this case unique," Dr. Brennan wrote, "is not just the father-son killing team, though that's rare enough. It's the deliberate testing of the bystander effect. Gerald Whitmore believed so strongly in human apathy that he was willing to commit murder in public view to prove his point. And he was partially right. Two witnesses did nothing. But he was also wrong. The Hendersons intervened, and that intervention saved a life." The case has also been featured in multiple true crime documentaries and podcasts. In 2022, a limited series titled "The Photograph the Birchwood Killers Case" aired on a major streaming platform, with full cooperation from Melissa, the Hendersons, and the victims' families. All proceeds from the series were donated to the Birchwood 6 Foundation and organizations supporting missing persons advocacy. Officer David Martinez, who was first on the scene and kept Melissa alive until paramedics arrived, received a commendation for his actions. He retired from the police force in 2023 after 25 years of service, but he still keeps in touch with Melissa. "She sends me a card every year on July 14th, Martinez said in an interview. "She calls it her second birthday, the day she almost died but didn't. Every year she thanks me for saving her life. But the truth is, the Hendersons saved her life. I just kept her alive long enough for the real heroes to get help." Dr. Patricia Morrison, the surgeon who operated on Melissa, has used the case in medical education. "Melissa Hartley should not have survived," Dr. Morrison told medical students during a 2020 lecture. "By every medical standard, she'd lost too much blood. The injuries were too severe. But she fought, and we fought for her. And sometimes that's what saves a life, the will to survive combined with people who refuse to give up." The case of the Birchwood Killers remains one of the most chilling examples of familial serial killers in modern American history. Gerald and Kyle Whitmore were convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, 6 counts of kidnapping resulting in death, 1 count of attempted murder, 7 counts of aggravated torture, 1 count of witness intimidation, and multiple counts of evidence tampering and abuse of a corpse. But beyond the legal charges and the sentences, the case represents something deeper about human nature, not the twisted philosophy that Gerald believed, but something truer. Evil exists. It can hide in plain sight, behind a normal facade, in an ordinary suburban house on a quiet street. It counts on apathy, on people's unwillingness to get involved, on the human tendency to rationalize away things that don't fit our comfortable worldview. But courage exists too. Courage to see what's really there. Courage to document it even when frightened. Courage to call for help. Courage to testify. Courage to survive and to build a life after unimaginable trauma. Melissa Hartley, 22 years old when she was attacked, is now 29. She bears a scar that will never fade, carries memories that will never leave her, but she's alive. She helps others. She speaks out. She refuses to let what happened to her define her completely. "I'm not just a victim," she said in her most recent interview. "I'm a survivor. I'm a nurse. I'm a friend and daughter, and someday I hope I'll be a mother. The Whitmores took 3 days of my life and tried to take everything else, but they failed. I'm still here. I'm still living, and that's the best revenge there is." Rest in peace to Rebecca Torres, Amy Cho, Lindsay Patterson, Brooke Sullivan, Vanessa Ramirez, and Kayla Morrison. Gone too soon, taken by evil, but never forgotten. And to Melissa Hartley, you survived. You fought. You turned your trauma into purpose. You're an inspiration to everyone who's ever had to find courage in the darkest moment. The photograph from Birchwood Lane will remain sealed in evidence, a private reminder of a public evil. But its meaning will echo far beyond that single image. Sometimes the most important thing any of us can do is refuse to look away.